Welcome to Four Quarter Lives, a podcast exploring the profound impact of longer lives and careers on everything: countries, companies, couples, and careers. And in this series, Season 10, on universities, what will higher ed do with the longevity revolution, and how will it respond? I'm Avivah Wittenberg-Cox, and on this week's Four Quarter Lives, I talk with Stewart McTavish and Alison Wood of the University of Cambridge about Better Futures, a new midlife transition program launching this autumn. In an 800-year-old setting famous for curiosity and collegiality, Cambridge is convening a cross-disciplinary community to help leaders design their next decade with curated spaciousness and scholarly stretch. We dig into what makes Cambridge's approach distinct, the collegiate system that naturally mixes generations and disciplines over dinners and seminars, a core curriculum built around foundations, frontiers, and wayfinding, and a philosophy that frames AI, law, finance, and policy not as ends in themselves, but as part of wider social systems. Stewart and Alison opened the hood on cohort composition, access, and scholarships, and two attendance pathways, 6-month and year-long, that balance immersion with real-life logistics and laws. Together, we explore how universities might quietly reinvent their purpose in the longevity century. Less about degrees, more about regenerative learning, community, and impact. So welcome Stewart McTavish and Alison Wood to Four Quarter Lives. Delighted to have you with us.
Thank you for having us. It's so lovely to be with you.
So today we're talking about what inspired the launch of a midlife transition program at the University of Cambridge, and why now? Starting actually literally right now in 3 weeks, I understand.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was definitely one of those things where different moving parts across the university came together just at the right time. So I think each of us involved in setting it up kind of had a different pathway to it. Alison, maybe I'll defer to you first, as you've been involved with kind of not this sort of program, but programs of this particular perspective for a while now.
You ask an interesting question about why this program and why Cambridge. And perhaps the answer is A, that there's an appetite in the world for this kind of work, as we're fully expecting to be active and agile and healthy and engaged for perhaps longer than previous generations. But also I think there's a really fundamental question about what universities are for, what their purpose is in the world, how they relate to the communities and the societies in which they are embedded and in which have created them. And I think there's a third question too, that individuals are looking at the context in which we're in. And I think many people are asking themselves serious questions about where they're putting their efforts, whether the assumption sets they've been working with about what is a successful and meaningful life are still valid, and if there are things that could be done meaningfully differently because of the new circumstances that we're in. So those three things, I think, are generating a move internationally.
Absolutely.
For this kind of program. And then, of course, Cambridge wanted to have that conversation that given the richness of its ecosystems, surely it made sense for us to be part of that.
So Stewart was referring to your background in this kind of program. Can you tell us a little bit, what was it? And I can't tell you how happy I am to hear you set out the reasons for this program as you have, because I think it really is up to universities to answer the longevity challenge and think about it and engage with it.
You know, in the history of university reform, which I confess I have a slightly geeky interest in, there's a pattern that emerges across traditions, actually, in Europe, across the continents of Africa, in India, essentially wherever groups of people gather to understand their world and their role in it, that usually something happens, and it usually fuels a discontent that says, wait, this isn't working. This isn't what we need, it isn't what we want something different. And often there are small groups of people who have competence, skill, networks, resources at varying levels and in different ways. And they come together and they see change. Now that sounds like a cliche because that happens all the time, except weirdly enough, it doesn't. But when you start to look at how histories of universities have unfolded, A place like Cambridge looks like it never changes. It's 800 years old. We teach in roughly the same kinds of gowns as we wore maybe 600 years ago, except most of us don't wear them for teaching anymore. It looks like a very stable, slow-moving institution. In fact, its history is one of quite radical change all the time. But it has this container of stability and security and safety, which makes it a very good place to innovate. So I'm interested in what universities are for and how they function. And I'm interested in how ideas become normal. How do cultures and societies grab onto something and before you know it, no one's thinking about its novelty anymore. It's just how we do it.
Yeah.
Right. So if you put all of that in a university context and you put that alongside those three big areas I outlined before, then a program like this is a logical next step.
Absolutely.
What would a university really do in the time we're in?
So I'm curious then to see more what you've designed and how does, you know that this is a series where we're interviewing all the different universities who've had the same idea to meet this moment. What makes the Cambridge approach unique, if anything? You spoke to me about Cambridge's very collegiate system and interdisciplinary depth. How might you describe I don't want to use words like competitive edge, but just what's the difference? I'm curious because so many of the first movers have been American and now we're seeing the Europeans respond. Cambridge will obviously be a really key leading light that people will be looking at.
Absolutely, but that's definitely part of our ambition, I think, is to be a leading light within that conversation. I'm not sure, unique gets overlooked a lot, but I suppose the particular perspective that we're bringing to it is perhaps the way that I do it is you don't one of the metaphors we use within the program is that of a natural system. So you don't just lift up a plant from one context and move it somewhere else and plop it down and expect it to thrive. You've got to think about what is your own context, what will thrive there, and how do you do that? So our approach is very much, and to amplify something what Alison was saying earlier, it's really around convening a community of leaders, practitioners, and knowledgeable people, and then creating a context and a structure for them to then discover and lead change within whatever so moves them. So within Cambridge, Alison and I have been working with Jaideep Prabhu, Rob Doubleday, Andy Phillips, Andy Neely, Kevin Flynn. There's been this whole community of people coming together to really say, how can we offer the best of Cambridge and attract the best to Cambridge? So within that, there's a core program which Alison is helping to lead, which looks at the foundations of how do we think about making change in the world, the frontiers of knowledge and practice, wayfinding to make a difference. We then match that to the deep academic and knowledge expertise of the academics within the university, and we match people one-on-one within academics that are aligned with their areas of exploration and interest. And then the collegiate system within the university very much creates a subsection of the community that is both inter and transdisciplinary over meals and dinners and seminars, but also intergenerational. So if you're exploring a thought, you'll meet, maybe you sit next to a professor who's 75 who teaches Greek and is also a Latin scholar on the side. And then on the other side of you, there's a 20-year-old that's studying environmental studies. And it's really those conversations and those blends of perspectives, I think, gives us a unique flavor, if you want to go for that unique word.
So you mentioned a lot of names. Now, my listeners won't be familiar with what disciplines or departments or parts of the colleges they come from. Like what disciplines, many of these programs in many of the university I'm talking to emerge from the business school, like Harvard, or the medical school at Stanford. Are you saying that you've gathered people from all disciplines to design this program? Is that what those names were reflecting?
I think so. All is a very broad word within a university with 121 departments and institutions. But my own background is computer science and engineering. Alison, I always misrepresent your background because I'm not familiar with the nuance there. But
I come from a humanities background, but I've also worked as a musician, and now I teach in education. The others that we're working with come from engineering, computer science, There are people from really different worldviews, medicine, public health. And that was intentional when we started to really speak about who should be involved in guiding and shaping the formation of this. I mean, it goes without saying that the cohort is completely interdisciplinary. And the kinds of people that we've invited to be part of, say, the seminar series that will happen every week with the cohort, they too represent really different disciplines. But for Cambridge, I think it came out of the idea that the educated self, whatever that is, we all have different versions of that. At some point, you have to be able to make connections between really disparate pools of knowledge. And you have to be able to start to really contextualize your positionality, your experience of the world, and the things you know, and the depth knowledge of your particular field, and how that relates to other fields. And in a way, as Stu was saying, the collegiate system in Cambridge, which is groups of academics and students who gather together outside of their particular specialisms, that structure encourages a kind of program that at its heart is about the unusual and unknown conversation. About what happens when the classicist meets the environmental scientist. And lo, something really interesting might happen.
Fascinating. So my other big curiosity is how much power there is behind these new programs. Is this for you a bottom-up initiative, a number of active, proactive, interested faculty getting together, or does it have strong backing from the university's leadership, the provost? How connected are those dots? Is this a strategic initiative for Cambridge, or is it a kind of pilot program for a group of smart professors?
I'm smiling as often the Cambridge leadership style is described as the top-down facilitation of bottom-up initiative. So it was definitely a conversation that was held broadly across the university, but we also have very strong leadership support within the university. So the university chancellor is coming in to meet with the cohort in the first term. We've got a meeting in the vice-chancellor's lodge in the second term for the cohort. We have all 6 schools of the university we meet with on a regular basis and discuss the program. And then I think somebody took me aside the other day and said, if we could have designed a more complex program, which included as many parts of the university as we possibly could, we couldn't have succeeded better. So it's kind of both broad as well as vertical.
Wonderful. So your program is grounded quite a bit in social impact. How broadly are you defining that, and how much focus is there on it? And what kind of outcomes are you hoping for?
You use the term social impact, and of course, I would love to have that conversation about what we mean by that. Sometimes it seems to me that there is, okay, let's put this bluntly, there is capitalistic gain and then there's social impact. And we set this up as a kind of opposition.
A dialect, yes, exactly. Isn't it insane? I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, so there's that. I think
then there's social entrepreneurship. That's trying to bridge the gap. There are these terrible words, right? Yes.
And then we'll add in social innovation. And here we are. I think, Avivah, the work of this program is a little bit different in the sense that we observed that many of the programs that existed in the US had quite a focus on a nurture of the self and a development of that self in a quite transitional moment in people's lives. We share that same idea that this program is to nurture transition. It's to nurture a meaningful, powerful pivot, often to something that is more meaningful and will look quite different, possibly to what you've already done. Yep. The difference, I think, for us is that we have intentionally set out a very structured, outward-facing view about what that effect will have on the world as you pivot. And we are also inviting people to really consider their relationship with societal structures, power, with efficacy, with positionality. So yes, it's about the social. I don't think it's necessarily about social impact as that term is conventionally used. Yep. It's definitely about efficacy in the world, whatever that means and at whatever scale. So I think it is a direct invitation to look at some of the language of doing good, of being better, of building better, and of development, and developing a nuanced and really robust sense that those words do certain tasks, but those tasks have been invented by us. Yeah. And therefore we might want to reinvent some of those ideas so that we
try to free us from the labels and let people reinvent themselves as broadly as they can, as long as it matters. I think it matters.
I think some of the assumption sets have not served humans and beyond humans well. So the invitation is to look at some of those assumption sets in order to usher in something that is truly more regenerative.
Okay. Cool. Now I want to drop into actually the content structure and strategy of the program itself. Can you walk us through a little bit the actual core curriculum? It's got these 3 pillars you've shared with me: foundations, frontiers, and wayfinding. So what is all that, and how do these strands help participants move from transition to any kind of impact we might want to call it?
Part of the challenge of conceptualizing the program, as we've said, is kind of what can Cambridge offer to leaders from around the world that have these different program offerings? And then what can we offer which is authentic and true to Cambridge, and also at the same time changes Cambridge through the process and makes a better version of Cambridge as we go through. So we were very deliberate when we were calling the program Better Futures, as Alison was alluding to, is challenging these conceptions of better, but also looking towards futures plural, as opposed to a singular vision or a single decision of where we are trying to get to. So we invite the cohort in, and we do select them as a cohort rather than a series of single individuals. You know, we want to build this team of people that will be working together during their time in Cambridge. So to help them both pursue their individual interests and to connect with each other, there's the core program, which follows the foundations, frontiers, and wayfinding that you've mentioned. There's the linking to the departments, and then there's the collegiate members. The purpose of the core program and those 3 modules is to help our leaders explore the question, what might my next phase of life look like if I was trying to cultivate a series of potential futures which we believe are better for the world? So, as you can imagine. And although we'll describe the 3 strands of the program separately, they really interweave and they interact with each other. They're not like they're separate standalone things. So there's foundations, which is the strand that Alison's led the development of, which is really saying, if we are going to construct a vision of the future, what do we need to have in place to create a firm basis for that to happen? What are the assumptions we need to revisit? How do we think about our relationship with ourselves, with other people, with the world, with society? Then there's frontiers, which is how do we enable our leaders to get to the frontiers of knowledge and practice and make sense with them and connect with them well. So often if they're stepping into a new field of inquiry, is how do we accelerate that learning? We're almost under no illusions that they could all do this themselves, and our job is to help make that faster and more effective for them, while at the same time maintaining space so they do that slowly, which is kind of our tension within the program, is how do we create a slow accelerator for their thinking? And then the final bit around wayfinding is, if we know where we are and we know where we want to get to, is then how do we connect those 2 points in space and how do we navigate towards it? So to your question around social impact, the best way to help society navigate to a point may be a political movement. It may be the way you interact on a nonprofit board. It may be how you invest your time. It may be a charity, maybe a company. We don't know, but we're hoping that's what will be explored as we discover this wayfinding thing.
Yep, very interesting. I heard you mention in your background, Stewart, that you're both entrepreneurship and computer science. I'm just curious if those strands are woven into the wayfinding. Is AI going to be a tool that you help people? I mean, I have the experience of many really senior leaders coming in and they're not used to being, alone with their laptops in a room anymore. They've lost big teams and IT departments and have to kind of relearn a lot of things. So I'm just curious if that's embedded in, if you've thought about those kind of practical applications with your background.
Yes, no, very much so. So that's part of the frontiers, is not only the frontiers of knowledge and practice and the thing that they're interested in, but the other things which might emerge them. Just as a complete aside, my very first time in Cambridge in the previous millennium was attending a conference on what was called Expert in Intelligent Systems. And people were worried then around, if we have computers making algorithmic recommendations to us, what does that do to the fabric of society? It was kind of the first day of the conference. So there's definitely that kind of AI is going to be part of our future, whether we want it to be or not, right?
Yeah.
But it's less around the technologies themselves, but what do they say about societies and what social changes will they accelerate, decelerate? What questions will we have to ask and answer in different ways? So yes, there will be particular things like environmental law, tax change, AI, but they're more symptoms of a larger system, and how do we help people conceptualize and engage in that system, I think is where we're trying to focus ourselves.
These programs often give the gift that is extremely hard for conventionally very busy, successful people to find, which is time.
Yes.
And so there is an element here of a curated spaciousness, which means that there are folks around who are also grappling with that question of, I am alone in a room with my laptop, and I have to be learning how to be okay with that, but also learn how to use whatever AI tool is, going to next transform my life. And you could apply that principle to all kinds of domains. So I think that structured spaciousness, that curated space is really, really important. And to do that in the company of others, that space for the informal, the ad hoc, the idiosyncratic. I did want to come back to something that we talked about just a moment ago, which is related to this, which is about these structures that we've come up with and these clunky terms, which anyone could take issue with, and you could debate about whether they're the right terms. There is a sense that we think of the future as a point out there. And if we get all our things in the right way and the right space and the right order, we will get to this point in the future. And this is a very, very practical and effective kind of thinking. And I think it's underpinned most of how we understand goodness and competence and success. And it underpins a lot of how we think about how we educate, how we are at work, our corporate organizational structures.
And the visuals, that nice unbroken vertical line that goes upwards.
Exactly. And even if we welcome squiggly, right? Even if we say, actually, it's squiggly, there is still the sense that there is this thing out there that we're kind of aiming for. And what's very interesting is that kind of thinking and worldview achieves certain things really well. What it does, though, is that it makes it very, very hard to be far more open to the emergent and the fact that the human perspective and human agency might not be the most important, the most powerful, or the most apt. And that can sound quite a confronting thing to think about when you're stepping up into an elite program like those offered at Harvard and Stanford and Chicago and Oxford and Cambridge. But there is a part of this program that is an invitation to look at that worldview and to say, actually, when we think about future and better and best, sometimes what we have to do is to step much more deeply into an ecological and systems and uncertain universe.
Yes.
The complexity shapes us and we shape it, that there is an interplay of elements that we can't even see, let alone control, and that might be our task, which is to live with all of the competence and expertise of the world that can build AI and vaccinations, and at the same time is deeply embedded, say, in the earth. Well, I like to say one hand on the laptop and one hand in the soil. And it seems to me that it's that move that our human family is crying out for at the moment. Yeah. And it seems to me that an elite institution, which we are at Cambridge, has a certain responsibility to help us make that move so that those in positions of responsibility or those who are influencing have an embodied understanding of the fact that this might be a fundamental shift in human consciousness and indeed human action. So that sounds like quite a bold ambition, and I realise that that's rather unconventional to offer in these sorts of programs. But I think the evidence is clear that business as usual isn't working so well for us.
It sounds wonderful, and I can see why you've filled up your first cohort. Tell me, what kind of participants? We're recording here in early September. You're starting in October. Yeah. You've got a first group. Who's come, and what kind of backgrounds, geographies, and projects are you hearing?
It's an interesting one. Sorry, I'm just smiling as a thing that occurred to me as Alison was speaking around the future as a point, and then I promise I'll circle back to the participants, is a thing I discovered having dinner with a Greek professor the other day, is if you interpret or if you read the Bible in the different languages, the language which the Bible is written in really informs how you understand it. And the original word for sin, I believe, comes from the Greek, which means to miss the mark. So if we're aiming for this mark and we miss it, by definition in the Greek Bible, that's a sin. And is that really what we're trying to encourage people to think? Anyway, that's a whole separate conversation, but it comes from this interdisciplinarity over good food.
Wonderful. A very good example.
But towards the core that we've attracted, so we have 21 people starting with us in 23 days. We can we can squint out and say 21 people in 21 days. That's not quite true, but we're almost there. They are, from the top of my head, about 57% female, 43% male, not as individuals, but as a group. That would be an interesting visual to try and work out. About 11 of them are with us on our 12-month pathway, which means that they have the right to reside in the UK. 10 of them are on our 6-month pathway, which means they're joining us on a visitor visa, therefore from overseas. They're broadly half and half US and UK, just because those were the communities that we first connected with as we were recruiting the cohort. But we do have people with dual citizenship in Mexico and Nigeria and other places around the world, Pakistan, for example. So it's a really good grouping. If you were to squint at them and try to categorize them, which is a thing we try not to do, they're almost equal groups of entrepreneur, traditional business background, finance of some description, and civil society and government. And though I say finance, I can almost hear some of my colleagues rolling their eyes, which I think is unfair to finance, but one's traditional finance, one's social investment. One person set up the first ESG investment fund in Africa. Somebody else is around asset valuation and trying to help couples navigate divorces and splits and family reuniting. So although we can give categories, the nuance within those categories I think is really important to understand and investigate.
Sounds like a wonderful group. Can you just go a little deeper into the two options of attending, the pathways and because I think that will be extremely relevant to everybody listening. And it's been a big dilemma for a lot of the programs about what length and structure of program they're going to elect to take. So I'm very interested that you're actually starting off with these two options.
To be honest, the fact that we have two options is a very practical basis that this is a non-word-bearing program. We don't give people degrees. Therefore, to make it accessible to as broad a community as possible, that would suggest a 6-month program, which people can do in the UK on a 6-month visa. But also to what Alison was saying earlier around spaciousness, we don't see this as a program where people come into the university, ask questions, get answers, and absorb knowledge. We very much see it as a community experience where they become part of the university and then in conversation and through processes co-create new knowledge and explore new spaces with the university community. Therefore, the decision around making sure it was, as much as we can do, a long-term residential program was super important to all of us, both from the effectiveness of the program on the university, but also on the individuals. If we're trying to imagine how we might be different in the future, doing that within the context of our day-to-day lives. We behave the ways we behave for the reason if I wake up in the morning and presented with a situation, I'll respond to it much like one of the reasons we go on holiday is to get away from the chores and the dishes and the maintenance that needs to be done. And we want to enable that for people within their lives, is to get away from the normal maintenance and habits of their lives and be part of Cambridge.
So give me a bit of the hard and facts stuff of tuition structures. How are you addressing access? You mentioned a little bit of alumni-funded scholarships. And then my bigger question is, are you envisaging this as a scalable model for the university? And how do we deal with the numbers involved and the need that you're trying to address?
If I do the hard and fast tax, so for the year-long program, it's a £60,000 British pounds program. For the 6-month pathway, that's a £40,000 British pound pathway. We have been very lucky that in our first year, and we're fundraising for our second year at this point, of the 21 people in the program, 5 are on fully funded tuition scholarships to be able to attend the program. And that is due to the generosity of both our alumni, as well as one person on the program is in fact sponsoring a place for somebody else on the program. It was one of the more joyful conversations I had when I offered them a place in the program, and they accepted it. And they said, great, now that you've accepted me on the program, I would like to be able to enable somebody else to participate on this program as well. So it was a really beautiful moment.
That's the kind of participants you really want in a program, isn't it?
Those are the types of participants we want in the program. And the reason that we felt it was important, it was the thing we've focused on the first year and we hope to take forward into the future years, is A, it's the right thing to do, but also it creates the right sort of learning groups. Yeah. So you mentioned part of my background is in entrepreneurship. And as I was supporting people through that entrepreneurial journey, I was really tired, if you take an extreme example, of either young people with little or no experience of hardships in the world, or people from business coming in and saying, government doesn't know what they're doing. I'm going to show them how to do it properly and apply a business model. So we wanted, not that I don't think our cohort would actually have those conversations, but if somebody is talking about education, we felt it was important to have somebody from the education sector within that cohort as part of the trusted group with them. As you often listen to your peers as much as you do the experts, even when you're older and you're not a teenager anymore, kind of peer and people that you connect and understand with, you tend to listen to more than others.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
It's an interesting question you ask about scale.
Yes, I was coming back to that. Thank you.
Going into that? No,
it's all right.
There is an emergent, I think, field, that programs like this now have been running for a little while, around what really works for the kinds of person you're likely to get on this kind of program. And
I just add, what kind of emotional and identity shifts are you looking to facilitate in them?
That's a very powerful question, isn't it? That sort of curated spaciousness comes to mind again. That's one of those unpredictable things, and the invitation is there.
Yeah.
But by no means the expectation.
Right.
And so exactly, and how does that happen? Well, that happens within trusted groups. It happens within, I would say, even the way that architecture, so the intellectual architecture of a university, but the spaces, the actual spaces you're in, being away from ordinary life, all of these combines free you, I think, emotionally and cognitively and physically, to be a different human for a little bit, and to affect
quite dramatically sometimes.
Quite dramatically.
Absolutely.
So there are ideal sizes, and there are subgroups that will form within a cohort. But I think the thinking is that between 40 and 50 in a year group feels right. That it's big enough to be buzzing and exciting and really diverse. It's small enough that you can get to know everybody. It's also small enough that the intellectual communities around that cohort can get to know people, and that meaningful cross-group relationships can be formed. So there's a piece there that the in-person experience seems to land about there. That said, there's also a lot going on where programs like this are generating a lot of very useful material. This podcast is maybe an example of the fact that there are conversations now happening more broadly about what we used to call the second stage of life, what some people called lifelong learning. And neither of those two things are quite apt for what's going on here. Yeah. So it's twofold for me. One, the cohort size really matters. But secondly, what happens now when we have subsequent years of people who've connected this way? What will that community be doing? What will they be producing? What kinds of objects and thoughts and conversations will be in the world?
So that leads me a bit to the next question. So we have groups of 40 or 50 coming through. What's the momentum being built? Like, how are you envisaging 5 or 10 year hence the post-program? My experience of having been through one of these and watching and admiring them all is that actually change takes quite a long time, especially at this age and stage. And so I'm curious, just how are you imagining? I know you're creating lots of curated spaciousness for it to emerge, but just if there was a dream of where you're headed with this and how these years and communities will connect and build on each other, what have you been thinking about or discussing?
Two things come to mind.
Because of course, I'm going to play this back to you in 10 years. So we're going to have another conversation.
Where I will regret some of the metaphors that I've deployed.
I think you've been very cautious, Alison. You're good.
There are two things that come to mind. One is, Stu said something earlier that it often doesn't work if you take a plant and you just take it out of its context and put it somewhere else and you hope to make it thrive. We're relying on a couple of things and we're inventing some things. And one is that the university itself is very good at keeping in touch. Well, parts of the university are very good at keeping in touch with its alumni. There's a strong culture of staying connected to the university and to your college. There are loads of opportunities to remain meaningfully connected intellectually, practically. So there's that. And that kind of system will evolve quite naturally alongside this program and be part of that. But we're inventing some things as well. There's an annual conference which will be a touch point for every year's cohort to have a chance to really show what they've done. Their thinking, something of their experience, and that we hope will become an annual fixture. But we're also looking at that awfully awkward term, the thought leadership that might emerge around this, and how we build a community where that is going on. in the form of the conventional objects of writing and podcasts and events.
Yep.
So A, the ecosystem that exists already, and then B, just a few light touch things. The other thing I wanted to say is that because this kind of initiative has very much at its core, these are the conditions for possibility. I wonder what we'll have here.
Yes.
And so I think there is this balance between a light structure that gives this some shape, and then also a deep curiosity and quite joyous approach to, ooh, I wonder what we have here. That would be what I would like to think back on in 10 years. That there's a structural apparatus already well in place. There's an intentionality about some invented elements particular to this program. And then there's this stance as a community that we are building, which says, ooh.
You're in your metaphor of the repotting of the plant. You're building the ideal kind of earth, nourishing, rich, that will then see, and you're trying to create an entirely new plant, kind of.
Oh, indeed. I mean, maybe to build on what Alison was saying, and kind of you asked for what the dream is. I think often dreams start with questions, and the questions that we are asking ourselves, and Alison is very good at saying this, is the point of the program is not the program.
Yeah.
Or then it just focuses on itself and it's like, we are all important. That's not the point. The point is to help the leaders that work with us prepare for the next 10 years of life. So the whisper at the heart of the dream is, how do we support them for that 10-year journey? And is that our role? We're kind of whispering these conversations with fellow leaders from Stanford and Harvard and other universities, as we've all got alumni treating different things. There's somewhere we can offer them or vice versa. But yeah, there's a whisper of a dream. But our focus at the moment is getting ready for the next 3 weeks and then the next 6 months. And then we'll work with our community, quite frankly, to explore with them, as Alison was saying, is what can we build together? It's not a thing that we're doing to them. It's a thing that we're doing with them.
Yeah. So that's the main focus, of course, of all these programs, is helping individuals with their next chapters, as you've so eloquently described it. I'm curious just to end a little bit on how you see this initiative contributing to a broader rethinking of the university's mission facing this longevity revolution.
We began there a little bit, didn't we?
Yeah. What do you hope the impact will be? What will Cambridge and this revolution that it's now just igniting? What do you think it might look like in a decade when we re-meet again?
Oh, goodness. I liked your idea of the whispering of the dream. I do think we began with the idea that programs like this are partly about practically asking what must and can universities do in the era in which we're in. So for me, that sense, and I should say that I've spent a good 25 years being obsessed with universities. I've tried to leave several times.
I'm so sorry.
We all have our burdens, and this is one of them. I am deeply obsessed with what universities could really do, how they could really be, and what potentiality there is. So I wonder whether there's something here around challenging the sense of when university is significant in your life, but more than that, what it means to be somebody who learns in the community of others, what it means to be an expert, how we understand the relationships between disciplines, and then how we understand the porosity between sometimes the very thick-looking walls, not only of the building, but a degree structure, an almost Byzantine admissions process. And I'm thinking particularly of the US and the UK now, and an equally Byzantine process of earning the right to call yourself a graduate. So for me, a program like this is quite an interesting way of testing the capacity of university structures to innovate. It's testing some of the assumptions of what it means to be a professor and what it means to teach. But it's also testing, I think, some of the assumptions about our relationship with power and knowledge, particularly in the later part of our life when we have accrued, quite frankly, often some very substantial and profound experience and understanding. And in our current moments, universities aren't so strong, I think, at those sophisticated kinds of intellectual exchanges around learning. We're fine hosting a dinner with clever people. But what happens when you build an intentional community of profound sophistication and competence and reach. And you do that without saying, and now we're all going to learn about X and we're going to explore X and you will write a dissertation using this particular mode. What if the toolkit and the apparatus and the sense of craft is much broader, but yet not so broad that this becomes only an exercise in self-expression? So for me, that's the maneuver here that's really, really interesting. I think this is a structural change to how we understand the DNA, if you like, of what a higher education system looks like. And that's partly why I think colleagues in Cambridge, and I don't wish to speak on their behalf if you are listening, but I do think there has been many an excited conversation about the fact that this could help us as a higher education community on every side of the pond to really start to explore what's possible, given the technologies we have and given the possibilities around health and energy and communication, for decades.
Very exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Sounds to me a little bit like you're detonating a very quiet piece of dynamite in the heart of a very old place. So I will be very curious.
Thank you. Hopefully in the most regenerative and gentle ways possible.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting way around how you frame it, right? It's how are we evolving, or how are we changing it, or how are we helping it return to its roots? Alison is very strong with this regeneration thing, and kind of one of the things we sometimes reflect on. If you think about a liberal arts education, is a term we use, and people pretend to understand what it means. If you look at the root of it, it comes from the arts liberalis, which is the crafts of free people. And a craft is multiple things. It's a community of practice, it's a set of tools and techniques, and it's standards of behavior and expectation. So how do we enable universities and people to return to that sense of what are the community standards, tools, techniques that enable us to live truly free lives into this world that we find ourselves in at the moment? And how can we do that in such a way that we, for us within the Cambridge program, offer the best of Cambridge? Because Cambridge means many different things, right? Kind of Cambridge, if you read some of the university statutes, to be a Cambridge person, you need to live so many days a year within 3 miles of Great St. Mary's Church, which is defined as the heart of the university. So you can think of it as a place. Some people think of Cambridge as an identity. So Alison was referring to people that went to Cambridge and they're a Cambridge man, and there's that sense of identity. But often we find the true Cambridge is that community of people that believe that they can improve the world through the application of deep knowledge and understanding. And that's part of what we're trying to cultivate, and not just in those that are within 3 miles of Great St. Mary's Church, not for those who were truly weird when they were 18-year-olds and were managed to navigate the Byzantine kind of admissions process. Yeah. But how do we make that available to anyone that aspires to join that community and then truly connect that community together to serve others is kind of, I think, where we're trying to return to.
I love that. A return to the source 800 years later. A last question, perhaps, for both of you is, what have you each learned, been surprised at, delighted by in this journey to create and launch this program?
You say that like they're separate things. What have we learned, been surprised by, and been delighted by?
It could be the same.
Could be. Really wonderful question.
Oh, I mean, we're taking our time thinking about this. It's a cliche to say that the thing you think is the problem is often not the problem. But it's only when you get into the gritty of thinking, oh, this is the problem, and I'm going to look at that you start to see and experience worlds that you were previously unaware of. So if I had to just pull something out of the great whirl of words and possibilities that are in my mind right now, I am wondering, Avivah, whether partly for me this process has been an experience of awareness of different worlds, of practice, of communicating, and of people that I hadn't understood before. So that in itself is an extraordinary gift. One other thing, sometimes I'm sure I'm the only one, I am prone to a certain element of despair about what's happening, who we are, the daily news cycle, how my children are being educated. And I'm not saying for a minute that programs like this exist as antidote to despair. What I am saying is that the work of building this, which has been the product of years and hundreds of conversations. And I think we must be well over 1,000 people that we have connected with and spoken to. And I won't even begin to talk about the committees. So many committees. But I do think for me, it's been a really powerful reminder that there is profound good and intentionality and wisdom that exists. And that the universe perhaps might be encountering itself in a new way with this kind of work and the work that's happening in Harvard and Chicago and other places. That it is a reminder that there are communities and coalitions of the very capable with enormous hearts. And that's been quite inspiring.
That sounds pretty good.
I'll go with that.
I'll go with that too. Stewart, you want to add a last word in?
Through this process, we have met very many accomplished individuals. And sometimes the question they ask is, but why does the university want to talk to somebody like me? You know, I'm not an academic. I don't have deep knowledge. Kind of why would they want to spend time with me? And in all the conversations I've had with the academics around this program, not one of them has expressed anything that more than enthusiasm of meeting with and working with and learning from accomplished individuals who have led change in the world, as that's ultimately what they want to do as well. It's just not necessarily where they're starting from. And that's been a delight.
Unalloyed enthusiasm, a little bit of hope in a chaotic world, and hopefully a massive, or at least an initial push to unleash the unexpected passions and talents of the elders in our world. I can't wait to see it blossom. Alison, Stewart, thank you so much for taking the time to share the vision and the dream. And I wish you nothing but, well, there won't be nothing but delight and pleasure, but focus on the delight and pleasure as it launches. And as I say, we will revisit this a couple years hence and see what it's all become.
Oh, indeed. We look forward to that conversation.
Likewise, it's been absolutely wonderful.
All the best. A bientôt.
Thank you very much.
For more thinking about the impact of our 4-quarter lives, you can read my column at Forbes and subscribe to my Elderberries newsletter on Substack. Let's design lives that aren't just longer, but better.